Hello, everyone. Welcome to Faith and Fellowship. We're three guys based in Utah. I'm Kirk.
I'm Joel.
And I'm Lyric.
And the goal of our show is to share stories and beliefs from different people local to our area.
Our mission is to bring civil discourse and allow people who hold different faiths a platform to tell us what they believe.
The show's model consists of an interview episode and a follow-up response episode where we'll discuss the topics that were brought up with our guests in the initial interview and give our take from a biblical standpoint.
Full disclaimer, not all comments and opinions expressed by our guests represent our own opinions. Thank you guys for listening and enjoy this episode.
All right. Welcome to Faith and Fellowship. I'm your host, Lyric. Across from me at the table, I have Kirk.
Lyrics, that's like the worst opening. You have the worst opening ever.
Well,
just know that.
I can put it down. What is up, everybody? I am back from the dead. Lyric is actually not here with us today. Unfortunately, he had some personal stuff come up, but hopefully he'll be with us in future episodes. But I am back, I think, for good. I think with the way that these podcasts time out, I think I'll be good to be on the next one too. But we'll see. But here with me in the studio, I have our host, Kirk.
I'm a co-host.
Co-host. And our temporary kind of interim co-host, Lana.
Hi.
Lyric, you've changed.
What can I say? I'm a V-neck model now. And today our guest is my father, Forrest Chapman.
Hi.
So today we're just planning on hearing his story. We're probably going to split this up into 2 episodes, and the format that we're kind of going to go with is the first episode, we're just going to focus on your testimony, your personal life, I guess ways that God has worked in your life before and after you came to Christ. And then second episode, we'll try and hone in more on what you do and what your ministry looks like. We're super excited for this. I'm going to try not to lead the conversation because I feel like I know more than our other hosts here, and I could, I want fresh questions and things like that. But
actually, no, because you haven't been here, you're going to do it all.
I'm going to tell your story for you. We don't even need you here.
See ya.
He was born at a young age.
On a dark, stormy night.
A dark and stormy night. The question of the day is, what do you do with a drunken sailor? Can I say drunken? Is that okay?
No, we'll have to edit that out.
No, I'll bleep it. If you know the answer, be sure to email Kirk Scholl at kirklovesponies@hotmail.org.
Make sure you
and
email.
He will win his wallet.
Did you ever get any emails?
I did not, no. Because you never actually gave the right email.
You never.
I did that on purpose. I would always say email jsquiggle at yahoo.com or AOL.com or something like that, because I was like, somebody may actually email you.
Yeah, I didn't get any emails.
Good.
But we actually have a Faith and Fellowship email that is in our bio on Spotify. So if you actually would like to email us, be sure to just go to our Spotify page, our YouTube page, and it should be there. And it should be in the bio of most of our episodes too. So feel free to tune in that way. The email is kirkscholllovesponies@hotmail.com.
All right, let's go.
Mr. Man Behind the Curtain.
Well, actually, Lena, why don't you lead it? Why don't you, what are some questions? Forrest is, let's see, Forrest, how long have we known each other?
20 years.
20 some odd years.
And I have known him all of 18 years.
Right. Yeah. So I think probably, why don't we start with, one of the things that we try to make consistent on our testimonies, because I guess up until this point we have had a combination of people giving their stories of how they've come to Christ, how they come to faith in Jesus. What does that look like? What circumstances or influences or anything like that, both external or something maybe internal, something that happened to you personally that maybe led you to faith. The other side of that has been we've been bringing people on who maybe share somewhat of the same faith, or maybe they're completely off the wall, and we just interview them and then we try to do a rebuttal or something that talks about it. So we're going to do both. So we want we want you to tell us exactly the most off the wall faith theory that you have that you believe in that we would disagree. I'm just totally joking. I'm totally joking.
His eyes are getting wide as you're saying.
No,
No matter what you say here, we all disagree, so we're going to have a rebuttal episode without you afterwards talking about why you're wrong. But we just let you know that ahead of time.
Let's start with maybe take us back and what are some
kind of what you grew up in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Okay, so my grandparents migrated from Mexico, and they were cultural Catholics. And so I remember as a child, I would go to Mass with them at times. And my grandpa always put $1 in the offering plate every time it was passed. I remember seeing Catholic icons, Jesus on the cross, Mary, saints. I remember copying my grandpa when he would walk in the building, he would cross himself. I remember going in one time, it was Ash Wednesday, and then the priest had his thumb and he smeared ashes on my forehead. And my grandparents taught me how to pray the rosary. So I think that was like kind of a religious start for me. I remember praying Hail Mary and all that stuff growing up. Then my mom divorced my dad when I was 1 and moved to California. I was born in Montana, and in California we lived with my grandparents for a little while. Then she got an apartment for us, small apartment, and she enrolled me. We didn't have a good experience in one school, so she enrolled me in a private school, even from preschool. And it was a religious school, but they did not tell me how to be saved. So I got a lot of religious instruction there. Who is Moses? Who is Jesus even? Who is Noah? Bible story type of stuff.
Was it not a specific religion school? Or?
It was a Lutheran school.
Okay.
It wasn't evangelical Lutheran. Maybe they would claim to be. Learned a lot about Martin Luther. Learned a lot about the Reformation. Yeah. This is what when I go back and I think about it, they said words that sounded like faith, but it was different. So, for example, they talked about how the Catholic Church would sell indulgences, how it was wrong, how Martin Luther posted the 95 Theses, how their icons were wrong, things like that. Even what Martin Luther preached, justification by faith. Mm-hmm. But then when it came to being saved, they never told me how to be saved. They had their own rules, their own icons, so
maybe just for the sake of our audience, just talk a little bit about just what an indulgence is. What would the Catholic Church would have meant by that?
Okay, so if your relatives died and they'd be in purgatory, depending on how good or bad they were, and if you purchased indulgences from the Catholic Church, it would help them get out of purgatory and into heaven. So basically, I was sort of very nominally, mildly Catholic. But then going to this Lutheran school, I was hearing about how the Catholic Church was wrong. And so I was like, oh.
Wow.
But I didn't know what to think at that point. So my mom had a bad back injury. And so I would walk or ride my bike to church by myself because I thought that would merit God's favor. I wouldn't say that as a 7-year-old, but I thought God would be happy with me because I'm making this effort to go to church. I didn't understand anything.
What kind of church were you going
It was
to?
Lutheran. It was where my school was. And I didn't really notice that much difference from the Catholic Church when I'd go. They still had priests who still wore purple sashes. They still had icons too. And their liturgy was really boring. And I never really got much out of it. It just didn't feel all that much different in practice to me. But however, with that came a awareness of God, an awareness of sin, of right and wrong, and God did use that. He was drawing me, and I was exploring at that point. Mm-hmm. I remember getting little stickers by my name in Sunday school, thinking the more stickers I had, the more God would like me because I was here more. Things like that.
Because at the core of that, even if you're talking about the indulgences, it's really work-based. It's either yours or And the indulgence is it's somebody else on your behalf trying to help you out type of a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like I was going from one works-based religious system to another. And though they did not pray the rosary, they had their own memorized prayers. You didn't communicate with God through prayer. You said your prayers. And so I
find it interesting that they, like, I guess I never thought or been exposed to it enough to think about this, but I find it interesting that they taught really against, about Martin Luther and against the Catholic Church, Catholic beliefs, but more or less, especially certain sects of Lutheran churches and the one you were at, it's more or less the same thing. It's the same ideas.
Still work-based.
Specifics might be different, but what are you even teaching against if you're practicing the same things? I don't know.
And that was wild to me. Now, I know there are evangelical Lutheran churches that preach the gospel.
I've met evangelical Lutherans who seem like they're sincere believers.
Yeah, and I think I went to school with some, and I think some were my teachers there. It just never came across. And so Joel knows the story. You want to talk about, like, events that led up to me coming to Christ. So I had 3 instances where I almost died. So the first time I was really young, I couldn't swim yet, and my mom's boyfriend owned a Shell gas station. He was pretty, like, we considered him well off because we lived in this tiny apartment where I slept either on the couch or on the floor.
Yeah.
But he had this house with a pool, and so we thought he was like rich. And he had a water slide that would, like, spin around like a curly fry. And I saw his pool once without water in it, and it was like shallow end, cliff, deep end. There was no like a gradual decline. It was just like it was either all shallow or all deep, and the pool would dump you out right over the edge. And my personal challenge was always to land with 1 foot on my tippy toes in the shallow end, and if I looked straight up, I could barely keep my head above the water. And I did it over and over again. And one time I missed. I don't know if I was going too fast or what, but I went plunk straight into the deep end. And I sank like a rock. Like, I don't even know how that's possible now. Like, if I want to, like, dive down underwater, I have to, like, exhale all the air out of my lungs and swim really hard. I just sunk. And I wasn't panicking yet. And I looked up and I saw the surface and I thought, how am I going to get way up there? And then I thought, hey, my sister, I had a sister who was 2 years older and she had swim lessons and stuff. My sister will jump in and save me. I was like, nah, I'm dead. The neighbor boy, weird kid, teenager, who sat in an easy chair during the summer in front of the TV with a jar of peanut butter and a box of dog biscuits. And that's
so good.
There's the title of the podcast right there. This one,
peanut butter and dog biscuits.
But I can't.
Lyric's favorite food.
I can't hate on him because he jumped in and he pulled me out and he saved my life. Second time, that was a few years later. At this point, I could swim. We're at the beach and I was body surfing, and I still to this day love body surfing. But I got caught in a riptide, and it was like somebody grabbed my ankles and just pulled me underwater. And then the first wave that came along flipped me heels over head. And I was just tumbling, almost flipping more than tumbling underwater. And I lost all sense of direction. I didn't have a chance to breathe in and hold my breath. So I just sucked in a ton of salt water, and it burned I remember it burning my throat, my lungs, and I was coughing and gagging and sucking in more and coughing. And it was that feeling of drowning. And that's really a terrible, horrifying feeling. And one wave crashed me out, and I was able to gasp, and I remember screaming for my grandma as it pulled me back under again, and that was it. Then I blacked out. And I mean, you know how when your adrenaline's rushing, everything goes a lot. It's like slow motion.
Yeah.
All the thoughts are going through my little kid mind. This is it.
How old were you at this time?
I don't remember, but I was pretty young. And it's like, this is it. I'm dead. Like, I just thought that was it. And that was the last thought I had. And then I woke up and my family was standing over me. My dad, my sister, my grandma. And I'm laying on my back on the sand and I'm looking up. And what happened was my grandma was imploring the lifeguard to jump in and he wouldn't do it. supposedly, according to him, he wasn't allowed to go in until the person passed out, like lost consciousness. Because he was saying like, well, if someone's panicking, they could pull him under too. And maybe he didn't want to deal with a riptide. I don't know. But like the flags weren't up for a riptide. Otherwise, my family would have never let me swim. A jogger came jogging by, jumped in, pulled me out, and then just kept jogging. I never even got to say thank you. Last time I almost died, choked on a Tootsie Pop. I used to eat the candy outside, and I hated the Tootsie Roll inside, but my mom taught me not to waste, so I tear it off the stick, take 2 chews, and then just choke it down. Well, one time it got stuck in my throat. Ugh. And my mom was in the shower with the door locked, and my sister was playing the piano, and I'm trying to do all this like primitive little kid sign language to tell my sister I'm choking, and she just rolled her eyes and kept playing the piano, and I thought I was a goner. The only thing saved me was I didn't know what else to do. I just filled up a little cup of water and drank it, and I kept filling it and drinking it until it finally went down. But by the time it did go down, I was like woozy, like ready to pass out. Mm-hmm. If I had to pass out, my sister wouldn't have done anything. My mom would have got out of the shower, dried off, got changed, done her hair. You know, it would have been. And so these 3 instances got me thinking about eternity. And because I had religion like in my consciousness, I'd heard about heaven and hell. And I thought, well, what does somebody have to do? Like, let's say next time I almost die, I don't almost die, I actually die. What's going to happen to me? And some guys in my class and I decided to ask our teacher. And now this was in our religious school. The teacher said, I really don't think you can know if you're going to heaven, but I bet if you died saving someone else's life, I bet you'd go to heaven then. And I was like, die? I'm good at dying.
Just not for somebody else. I'm just killing.
So I tried. Like, all the scenarios went through my head. A drive-by shooting and I jump in front of the bullets, or a car's out of control and I push the old lady out of the way and the car hits me. But that didn't happen. And so in religion class, we finally decided to ask the priest. And the priest said, well, you can't know you're going to heaven until you're confirmed. And we're like, well, when are you confirmed? They said 8th grade. And I'm like, 8th grade? I'll die before then. Like I'm 7 years old at this point, thinking I'm dead. Like there's no way I'm going to. He said, but in the meantime, you can get baptized. I was like, well, I was already baptized, Roman Catholic, like as an infant.
Yeah.
So you were baptized as an infant?
Yes. Okay. Well, what they called baptism, sprinkled on the forehead. You know,
right.
Or maybe they poured. I don't know because I was a baby, but I know I wasn't immersed. And then I said, okay, whatever. Well, do it, whatever. And so my mom was in bed because of her back injury. And so my uncle met me there. And it was like a Saturday. They didn't even turn the lights on in the church building. It was like empty. And he like picked me up around the waist, kind of around the ribs, and it hurt. And the priest dipped his fingers in water and just kind of flicked it on my forehead. And that's not what I was expecting at all. I didn't even know what he meant by baptized. I didn't even know because I didn't remember what happened as a baby. I know my mom told me I didn't know what the word meant. And sprinkled water on my forehead. My uncle put me down and the priest's like, you're now a Christian. And even at 7, I felt very fishy about that. But I wanted to make sure my stuffed animals were Christians too. So I lined them all up. I got a bowl of water and I sprinkled water on each one going down the line. You are now a Christian. You are now a Christian. You are now a Christian. But I knew, I'm like, well, if that's all it takes, you can throw water at a stuffed animal. Like even logic told me this isn't gelling, So there was a lot of angst, anxiety, and conflict in my soul at this point. And, like I like to say it like this, when you have a itch on your back and you ask your wife to scratch it and you're like, no, north, okay, southeast. And she's scratching around the itch, which makes the itch worse without actually scratching it. That's what this was doing. Religion, these baptism experiences, me riding my bike to church, this was scratching around the itch without actually scratching the itch.
And making it worse.
And it was making it worse. And I was thinking about it at night, and I was tortured by it.
Yeah.
So here's a question. Maybe we don't give 7-year-olds enough credit, but like if I were to think about it, like 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, for the most part, I would say maybe don't. Like this doesn't bug the average one as much. Do you think maybe your upbringing with, not having a dad around, your mom working, your sister, like a sister who's kind of hands off. Do you think that all contributed to you maybe just being a deeper thinker at a young age?
Maybe so, because I remember living in my head a lot.
Yeah.
You know, because my mom was always working, trying to make ends meet for us, which I respect and deeply appreciate. My sister had friends in the neighborhood. I didn't. There were no boys in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
We lived down this alley with no street lights. Like, nobody wanted to live where we lived, and there weren't any kids my age anywhere around. And so I lived in my head a lot. Yeah. So, like, I just had lots of time to... It's the most vivid time in my life as far as memories go. I remember my childhood better than I remember any other period of my life. And I'm old.
You are old.
I'm very old.
You're at least 100.
At least. Actually, I turn 100 this year, September 28th.
Yeah.
Well, you know, a couple things that come to my mind. One humorous, one serious. One is with the choking of the Tootsie Roll Pop. Do you feel like you figure out how many licks it takes to get to the center?
Oh, so here's the thing. I never had the patience.
Yeah.
But Chris Meredith in my school did. He would sit in front of the TV in his easy chair with a notepad, and he would just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When he get to 10, he'd make a little tally mark, and we'd approach him right when he'd get to school in the morning. We'd be like, "How many last night, Chris?" And he'd tell us 904. He'd open his little note. He'd go 914.
How about that?
And then sometimes,
How about that?
so it varied a lot. Like, sometimes it was like 1,500. It was like over 1,000, and sometimes it was under 1,000.
Yeah.
But we didn't, like, at that age, we weren't like thinking about averages. You know, like, hey, let's add them up and divide by. We were just like, how many last night, Chris?
Right.
It changes every time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And by the way, the owl told us the world would never know.
Yeah, right.
No.
But the owl didn't know Mr. Chris Meredith.
Right.
But I was more like the owl. I just didn't
Just
have...
like, what?
But I do have a funny story about that. So on some of the wrappers, I don't know if you remember, but there would be a little star on the wrapper, but not on every wrapper. And people at school would say, well, if there's a star on the wrapper, that means you get a free one. So I remember walking up to the guy at the counter at 7-Eleven, like, with pride, like,
Oh no.
I got a star. I slapped it down, and the guy's looking at me, and it's just like this awkward silence. And I'm like, I got a star. And he's like, good for you. I'm like, I get a free Tootsie Pop. He's like, no, you don't.
You were
like,
lied to.
Yeah, I was lied to.
The serious thing is, you know, we talk a lot on. We try to take every conversation that we have to think about the gospel, and when we're thinking about stories, everybody's story has individual different components to it, but there's always this underlining similarity of really God drawing us to himself and using circumstances, using his word, in your case, using, you know, a religious background and, you know, family dynamic. And even, I mean, being a Lutheran today, we've talked about the differences between that, but Luther himself, you know, would have, if you read, he would have described that itch when he was in the Catholic Church. You know, it was like he was trying to find all these answers out. He's a monk. He's doing all these things, but he never could answer that question until he kept reading the Bible and, you know, actually the book of Romans, and finding, you know, there was faith, that, you know, that the just shall live by faith. So it's interesting. And, you know, we have listeners and we have people we're in conversation with who that's really the question that you've got to answer at the deep. Maybe it's not always being asked publicly, but it could be asked in your own heart, and you've got that itch. And man, I think that's a good way to put it. Keep trying to scratch that understanding, and, you know, we're looking forward to hearing the rest of how they got scratched.
So my mom, she had a disc injury. She took care of the elderly and disabled. So she did a lot of lifting, from wheelchairs to bed to wheelchairs. And one of her discs, it didn't like rupture, but it like slipped out, you know. And so the doctor told her, just lay down. And so we're talking like 9 months, just like bedridden.
Oh, wow.
she would like get up and she could like hobble to the bathroom, but that's, or from her bed to the living room floor. And she was like super bored. Like, she's there all day.
Yeah.
She's the only fellowship she has is me and my sister. And we're just kids, and we're trying to figure everything out on our own, like little kids trying to take care of the house and take care of mom's stuff. What I didn't know is when I'd come back with my coloring pages, when I'd walk to church and stuff, my coloring pages had Bible verses on them. And she'd stare at those all day. And so God was using his word in her heart. And I didn't know it. I'm just like, Mom, I colored you a picture. Wow. And so my mom taught our cat how to fetch. Like, she's had all the time in the world. Our cat learned how to use an inversion table, the kind that you strap your ankles in and hang upside down. Our cat learned how to use it. So my mom was she just bored. She at home all day, every day, just laying out. And she told me this. We were just there last week visiting, and she said, you and your sister never spoke about it, but you just had this understanding where one of you would come and sit with me, the other would go play, then the other one would come back and sit with me, and the other one would go play. And it was just like, I didn't know that. I don't remember that, but God just gave us I guess just an understanding and a compassion with that. But God broke a pipe. I know it was God. He broke a pipe in our little apartment. And my mom called the plumber. Plumber came, fixed the pipe, dried the carpets. He asked my mom, would you like my wife to come visit you? My mom was lonely, just laying around all the time. Of course she wanted adult company. So Debbie Boothny came to our house, and she just struck up a friendship with my mom. And as soon as my mom was like able to get up and get out of the house and all that, she took her to a play that depicted the last week of Jesus's life and his death and resurrection.
Oh, wow.
And her heart was already primed and ready. So Catholic background, but like nominal Catholic. I don't think after she left the house at age 16 to make it on her own, I don't think she attended services after that until like we were born and, living with my grandparents and stuff. But maybe she did. I just don't think she did. And looking at those Bible verses and stuff, she was just primed. She saw the gospel visually. The pastor gave an invitation. She responded by repenting and believing. And she came home and she just said, I have to tell you what happened to me tonight. And it was like, that's exactly the answer I was looking for.
Yeah.
It was like I wanted the answer, but nobody could give it to me. Get baptized, go to church, die for someone. They're telling me the things and scratching around the itch. And then my mom came home and she told me the gospel, which I knew. I did hear that Jesus died on the cross. I even heard that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. I heard that he rose again from the dead. But I didn't know what to do at that point. And like in the simplest 7-year-old way, I just believed with all my heart. And that was the moment I really think that I was saved. And it was like the itch was scratched and the thirst was quenched, and that was the moment that Christ saved me.
That's great. Did you get at that time how much time in between the trusting, believing conversion to like a public baptism? And
a long time.
Was there a long time?
Yeah, we have about 12 minutes tops. But if you want to take the next few minutes and just kind of talk about, just thinking like after your salvation, your teenage years, your young adult years, what did that look like for you? And what was your, church attendance like? I mean, he said baptism, like your public profession, your growth. I mean, obviously growth happens your whole life, so you can't capture it. But like, I guess the following years, what stood out to you?
So we didn't really receive like discipleship. So this is in the 90s at this point, and it's like the height of the hyper charismatic movement, like the Toronto blessing and all that was happening in Canada. We were going to crusades and stuff where people they had Holy Spirit laughter, Holy Spirit barking, They were getting on their hands and knees, barking like dogs. Holy Spirit glue. Someone would get slain in the Spirit, fall on the ground. They couldn't get up for hours. We went to Benny Hinn crusades. You know, he supposedly healed my mom's back. It didn't happen, but and so we were like caught up in this. And their thing was, we're getting fresh revelation. What do you need the Bible for?
Right.
So I was not growing, and the whole thing embarrassed me. Okay, so then when I was in junior high, we moved back to Montana again. And we were going to this Pentecostal church. It wasn't quite that wild, but it was enough to where I was embarrassed. And I did not want my friends to come with me. Like, I wanted my friends to be saved. I hadn't received any discipleship. I didn't know how to communicate to them, or at least I wasn't confident to communicate to them how to be saved. But I did not want them to come to this church because it was embarrassing. Like, the pastor's wife would take over. He'd get up to talk, and she'd just jump to her feet and start speaking in tongues. He'd go sit down, and everyone would just watch her. And she'd just, like, dance around, flop around, speak in tongues. And it was like, what? I won't say her name, the Mrs. So-and-so show. And that was, like, the service.
Wow.
And so it was so embarrassing. And I'm sitting in my Spanish class, and I'm thinking about these things. So because I grew up from a Hispanic family and in Southern California, my Spanish was like light years beyond anyone in my class. So my Spanish class was so boring. Like, they were learning like the basics. So I was just staring out the window, just thinking about these things. And I saw this little church building, and I'm like, that looks tame. and I like
normal.
I imagined people, like normal people, walking in and like carrying their Bibles. And so I told my mom, I'm like, hey, Mom, can we go there, please? She said, okay. And the pastor shook my hand and looked me in the eye. And he said, I am glad you are here. And I was like, this is my new church. He's glad I'm here. You know, a single mom home, to have a man put his hand on my shoulder and say, I'm glad you're here. It was just like, it was golden.
Yeah.
And so then he opened his Bible and then he preached. And I was like, whoa, never heard this before. And I told my mom, like, this is the place. But she hated it. And so we'd go back and forth. We called it my church, her church every Sunday. And then after a while, I'm like, no, I'm just going here. I'm not going anywhere else. And she came around. And then as a teenager, I was in high school. I think I was a sophomore in high school. Then I was baptized the Bible way.
At that same church that you were going to.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And that's when I just feel like my spiritual growth took off. And started reading the Bible on my own. That was the first year I read the Bible through in a year. And just took off. And then after a while, I'm like, I got to get out of a lot of stuff. And so I withdrew from the public school just to homeschool, because I knew my faith wasn't strong enough for me to like just adamantly take a stand. I knew I had to get out of stuff first. I needed to grow some, and then I could take a stand. And so that's what I did. I pulled out, homeschooled for a while.
So when you say you pulled out,
I told my mom I want to homeschool.
and then she homeschooled you.
Yeah. In a very hands-off way. But the homeschool curriculum we used, I was already so far ahead of it. It just took me like an hour or two every day to finish my schooling, and it was like I slept through it basically. So I don't feel like I got any more education after that. That was like halfway through my junior year.
And you graduated as a homeschool?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I was able, after some time, to step back in and be able to influence my classmates and stuff. And so brought some guys to church. They were saved. A couple of them are pastors today.
Oh, wow.
And, guys on my basketball team and stuff. And I was able to, at that point, I was able to stand for Christ. But I needed to get away from some stuff first, get some things squared away, and grow some before I would be equipped to do that. So.
Yeah, one story that comes to mind. Can you share with us your dropping out of basketball story?
Oh yeah, sure. So at this point, I was playing on the homeschool team, which was like obviously much less competitive than the public school. We would play other Christian schools, other homeschool teams. Sometimes we play public schools. For a homeschool team, we had a pretty good team though. We really did. And we even went to the national tournament. And now I got to say we weren't on top. Like some of these guys were playing nationally ranked teams. We weren't them. But our coach, so we made it to the the Christian school state championships, and it was the same week that we were having special meetings at our church, and I just really felt like I needed to be there for these, and so I didn't go to our first game. I thought, okay, the team can win without me. It's just the first game, staying back. Well, a couple other guys stayed back with me. Well, if he's going to church, I'm going to church. And because we missed that, we had to forfeit that game. And our coach went to a meeting with the board, and he just lost his mind, like screaming at them. And I don't know all the details of what happened, but I know he got us kicked out of the tournament completely, where we didn't even get to compete. Now, the state champs hadn't lost in like 7 years, not a single game. They hadn't lost. And we almost beat them. I had in the season, I'm talking about in the season, not even in the tournament, I had the shot to beat them. It was like probably a 40-foot shot. It was like almost, we're getting close to half court. And the coach drew up an inbound play. And I barely missed the shot. So I wanted them so bad I could taste it. Like we could beat these guys. But our coach got us kicked out of the tournament. So we didn't even get to play them. And then once that died down, the coach called me and he said, you're really going to have to choose basketball or church because you can't do this to the team. I said, okay. And I never played again.
I choose church.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, if you know my dad, that's a huge decision right there to make because he loves basketball and very good at it too.
Well, it comes to a point where, we talk about what does Christ mean to us. And a lot of people would say, well, yeah, I can come to Christ. We talk about that here in our context because when we have people come to Art City Church, they're coming out of a religion that is really basically, and we could say this about Catholicism, honestly, and salvation is found in the church. And so as long as you're part of the church and you're doing the things that you've been told to do in the church, which there's a lot of legalism, you're okay. If not, then you're not. And so when people leave that, a lot of people love, I want to come to Jesus. I want to come to the person. What is it about Jesus? And so we start telling them, because that's where it is, right? The finished work of Christ is where we find our salvation. But then sometimes there's a disconnect there that has to be taught, discipled, is that there's not in the way you were taught, but there is a connection to being part of Jesus and simultaneously being part of his body, the church.
Yeah.
And that in an organic way, those things are inseparable. And so you have to learn what it means to be part of the church while being part of Christ. Salvation is not found in the church, but you need to be serving one another. So church not an institution, church not a building, church is people. And so as you come to Christ, you didn't serve. And so it seems like that's something there where it's good that you learned. I mean, you learned that at that age to say, you know what, there's something here about this local church that I'm finding, as I'm following Christ. And sometimes that cost us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it went from going to church because, you felt like you could attain God's favor to going to church because you wanted to.
Oh, I needed to. One time I had a car full of guys. We were hanging out, running around Missoula, which is like the city in Montana. We're running around Missoula, and I look at the time. I'm like, oh, snap. We got church at 6. We hop in the car, and we're going 90, and I get pulled over by a police officer. Where are you headed, son? Oh, you're not going to believe this, but we're going to church.
He let you off?
I think I had to go to traffic school, but yeah.
Oh.
But I didn't get a ticket or anything. But like I needed to be there. Like you couldn't keep me away.
Yeah, it's a hunger.
Yeah, I had to be with my family, and that. Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on time here, but I think this is a good question. I know Lyric, has a question that he likes to ask everyone, which we'll probably ask him next episode. But this is a question that I think we could start asking most of our guests too. In your words, and I guess, because you line up with where we're at, what does the Bible say somebody has to do to be saved, to go to heaven?
The two most important words that I find in the Bible, when it comes to the mechanics of being saved. So first, Christ did everything that needs to be done for a sinner to be saved. Everything. Sinner can't do anything to save him or herself. But God does ask us to respond to what Christ has done. And those two words are repent and believe. And I think those are the two most important Bible words when it comes to the mechanics of coming to Christ.
Yeah, it's good. Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to have Forrest back, so hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Next time, we're going to pick up the story here, and maybe we'll go from there until your journey of children's ministry and where you're at today.
Cool.
And so thanks for being part of this episode. We miss Lyric, but he is here in spirit in the person of Joel.
Yes, I am. One moment, I'm getting a call from my mom. Hi, Mom. I can't talk right now. I'm on the podcast.
Oh,
After
my
this,
goodness.
we're going to go get some food, and I'll really put it down.
Okay. Oh, man.
Speaking of that,
Lyric,
Kirk,
we love you.
are we doing wings tonight?
Oh,
That
sounds so good.
Well, not you.
Not me?
I just meant me and Kirk.
Yeah, it's just me and Forrest. So
Got him.
We'll spare some
I
for
will go
Lana
to
and
In-N-Out.
see.
I will go to In-N-Out without all of you.
that's fine.
Oh, you
I
can,
missed In-N-Out. I miss In-N-Out.
I do
can take me
too. I'm
with
dying for In-N-Out.
We're going to have to go.
Thanks
Anyway.
for being part of this podcast. We will see you next time on Faith and Fellowship.
Peace out. So, Kirk, question.
We are rolling. I'm going to do quiet on the set. Don't breathe into your mics, so turn away from your mics. We're going to do this for like 5 seconds, and then I'll clap and we can go. Lyric, I will. Okay. All right, for real.